President Bush, as you know, had strong roots here in New England. Born in Milton, Massachusetts, raised in Greenwich, Connecticut, educated at Phillips, Andover Academy, and Yale University. His family has owned that compound in Kennebunkport, Maine since the late 1800s, and Bush spent so much time there as president, came to be known as the Summer White House. In his later years, he spent plenty of time there as well, along with his wife of 73 years, Barbara, who died a little over 7 months ago. I'm joined now by the co-author of George and Barbara Bush, A Great American Love Story, who worked on the project along with their granddaughter. Kellyanne Chase joins me now. Kelly, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
So let's do the gossip part. What's the secret to being together for, 77 years? What did they say? You interviewed Mrs. Bush several times, right?
We did. We had the opportunity to interview Mrs. Bush, and, she would say, when we first initially asked her about it, she said, well, you got to be in love, of course, it's that obvious. But really it was, their mantra was really being strong when the other person doesn't have strength. And they really were able to, in a life of ups and downs, pick each other up and move forward together.
73 years married, for those who don't. I want to talk about the ups for a second, then focus on a horrible down in a minute. The ups, to me, every time I read a story about people of Kennebunkport who refer to them almost, not disrespectfully at all, but lovingly, as their neighbors, stopping into the general store. Is that apocryphal, or is that real?
That is so real, and President Bush famously calls Walker's Point his anchor to windward. It's where he wants to be. It's where he is able to relax and retreat. And if you're in town, most people have a story about the Bushes. Mrs. Bush
a personal story.
A personal story. And Mrs. Bush used to walk on the beach up in Kennebunkport every morning. She knew the names of pets, and she knew the names of the owners. And in talking to people in the research for this book, people said, President Bush is my pen pal. They wrote so many letters to other people and within the community.
He was a big letter writer. Not only it sounds like there, but also some beautiful letters when he was in the war, and ultimately was shot down in the war too. He
was an incredible letter writer. That's the way they communicated now. Now we text and we send off emails really quickly, but the art of letter writing, President Bush was very poetic and thoughtful in so many of his responses. He wrote a letter to each of his grandkids when they were born. He wrote letters to them when they were going through a particularly tough time. When my co-author, Ellie, was in kindergarten, she was doing a project on her grandmother, or her great-grandmother. And so President Bush wrote to her, while in the White House, this long letter about his mother and why she should be part of this class project.
That's really beautiful. Speaking of their people in their family, one of the things that my radio co-host, Marjorie Egan, mentions this a lot, the fact that unlike so many politicians who exploit for personal gain tragedy in their families, most of us never even knew there was a Robin who died at 3 from leukemia, right? Until far later in their lives. That was a huge moment for both of them, right?
Yes, they were living in Texas at the time, and they had George W., and then they had Robin. When Robin was about 3, she was diagnosed with leukemia, and the doctors told them to kind of let her quietly slip away, but they decided to take her to New York for some better doctors. And that during that time was really difficult, and Barbara kind of held it together in the hospital room. They made a rule, no crying in the hospital room. So President Bush was known to kind of be crying a little bit in the hallways of the hospital.
And how much of the death of their young child stay with them throughout their lives? Again, we didn't hear much about it, which I think is the way it should be, but isn't the way it often is in politics. How much was that a part of their... They had 6 kids already,
Yes,
right?
they did. You never get over the loss of a child, and that was very true for them. President Bush was in New York on business, and while he was there, he was thinking of Robin, and he wrote this beautiful letter to his mom about missing her, and this was 6 years after she had passed, and telling her that in a house full of rowdy boys, they needed a girl. And he wrote this beautiful letter to her that she kept secret for many years. And, months later, Doro Bush was born, which is my co-author's mom.
So did he consider himself a Mainer or a Texan? I mean, which was he in his heart? I mean, he's from here. I mean, most people think he did the Texas thing because it was better for his political career. But then he became a big-time Texan. Where was his heart? Do you know?
Well, I know that when they did decide to move to Texas, it was this leap of faith that they took together. They wanted a new adventure together, and they really built their life together in Texas. And they have so many fond memories of that place and so many friends and family that are down there. But I know that Maine is a truly special part of who they are, and every May that they are able to arrive at the compound, they are so happy. And when they left every October, it was sad to see it in the rear view.
I never met Barbara Bush, but everybody says what a humble, down-to-earth person she was. Did she agree to do this only because her granddaughter was involved in the project? Is that a safe assumption?
Well, when Ellie had initially asked her for her, her blessing on the project, she had said, "Why on earth would anyone want to read about our marriage?"
Oh my God!
And so it was kind of funny. But by the end, she actually called us for one last interview from her hospital room, just to tell us and reflect a little bit on their life.
What'd she say in that final call?
She always says that everyone should go 3/4 of the way in any marriage, and that is certainly true for her, and is what she did.
Can we end with, tell us one thing that you think we don't know about Barbara and George H.W. Bush that you do.
Well, when we were doing the research for this book, the Chief of Staff of President Bush, Gene Becker, called us to tell us a story that when the doctor said that President Bush and Mrs. Bush should sleep in separate beds because sleep is so important at their age. And President Bush refused. He said, "No, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I need to be able to reach out and know that she's there."
Oh my God, is that a beautiful story. Congratulations on your
Thank
work.
you.
You're very lucky to have known them. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
For your time. Kellyanne Chase, thanks. The book again is George and Barbara Bush, A Great American Love Story.